Good afternoon, everyone. I want to wish all our veterans out there a happy Veteran Day. There is no other day that is better than today when we are celebrating those who have laid down their life for the survival of our nation. Uh, there is no other day to talk about trauma other than today when we are celebrating the exploits, the courage, and the resilience of our veteran to defend the life of the citizens. Today, we want to talk about trauma, and I think today is a perfect day to do that. Today, I will be talking about reinventing yourself after a traumatic event, reinventing yourself after a traumatic event. Well, let me start by saying that trauma is not something that is immune. There is no one that is immune to trauma, no matter how highly placed you think you may be. You may be a leader of a nation, you may be a leader of a congregation, you may be a medical personnel, no matter, regardless of who you think you are, there is actually no one that is immune to trauma. The way trauma works is that every one of us, we have like a flowing lava of trauma that is flowing undisturbed in our belly. The only thing that trauma is waiting for is an outlet for eruption. For as long as there is no outlet for that trauma to erupt, it will appear as if everything is calm, everything is good, everything is working perfectly. It will appear as if there is no problem at all. And because of this situation that many people find themselves, they think that they are immune to experiencing trauma. But there is no truth that is further than what I'm sharing with you, that every one of us, we have the potential to experience trauma. The way we experience it may be different. How we are going to experience it may be different. What can even cause it may be different. And the degree of what can cause us to experience trauma can also be different. And these are the things that people usually take for granted because some people are more susceptible to experience trauma in quick succession. Just little thing, they are already battling with that trauma. Whereas for some people, it may take a great deal of stress or some difficulties or challenges before they begin to experience trauma in the real sense. But the point I'm trying to make is that trauma is something that can happen to anybody. And it doesn't matter who you are and how you are placed in the society. So we have to be humble with that. And we should not also see those who are experiencing trauma as though they are lower in human quality or they don't have enough resilience to endure trauma. Trauma is not something you can scorn people about, even though some people do it. It's not something you can pontificate yourself over. It's not something you can feel superior over. Trauma does not regard who you are when it eventually comes, but we must, the disposition that I believe we must demonstrate to those who are experiencing trauma is to show empathy towards them, is to show love towards them, is to give them community support, is to provide social support for them so that they can come out of that traumatic experience. So today we are going to talk about how you can reinvent yourself after a traumatic event. Some of us have gone through trauma in life. There is no doubt about that. Some may be in a higher degree. Some may experience it at a lower level, but at one point or the other, we all have this tendency to have something that can trigger trauma within us. If you have ever lost a loved one, you've ever lost something special to you, these are usually the candidates for a traumatic event, or you've experienced a great loss through fire accident, through motor accident. These are easy stuff that can trigger trauma. So if you have ever experienced any of those things that I mentioned, or many other things that could happen, then it tells you have experienced one form of trauma, or you have the lava already flowing inside of you that is waiting for just one little thing to trigger it off, and then you have that eruption. So let's start by defining what trauma is. What is trauma? Now, trauma, I would say, is a psychological, emotional, and sometimes physical response to an event or series of events that overwhelms a person's ability to cope, and in most cases leave lasting negative effects on how one functions in life. One thing about trauma is that it has a way of affecting the different levels of our existence, our physical existence, our emotional existence, our physiological existence, it has a way of affecting every dimension of our existence. And it can, in most cases, leave a very dangerous and lasting effect that sometimes some people don't get over it. But we want to teach you how you can come out of it if you are willing to take lessons from some of the nuggets that I will be sharing with you in this podcast. So that is what trauma is. It's a psychological, emotional, and sometimes a psychological response. It's a response. It's not what is happening to you that is the trauma. That is sometimes the mistakes people make. Some bad thing can happen to you, but the way you react to it is what we call trauma. Some people will react to it in a way that it's very, very difficult to comprehend, whereas some people will respond to it as almost normal. So it is that response to an event that we call a trauma. So trauma isn't just about the event itself. It is about how you react, how you experience, how you process that which is happening to you. That is what trauma is. In that sense, what traumatizes an individual may not necessarily traumatize another person in the same way. So we all react to situations differently, and it is the way in which we react to traumatic situations that defines the kind of trauma or the level, the type of trauma that we experience in life. So I'm going to talk about some of the causes, or sometimes you cannot really differentiate between the causes and the types of trauma, because sometimes the causes sometimes present itself as a type of trauma that you will experience. So I'm going to talk about 7 causes, or using it interchangeably, types of trauma that there is. So like I said, trauma arises when an event or patterns of events overwhelms a person. This could happen in the mental realm, in the physiological realm, in the emotional capacity to cope with that which has happened to you, which greatly affects the sense of safety, sense of control, and even the kind of identity you present to the public. That is how trauma affects each and every one of us. So the cause is not just the effect, it's not just the event itself. So, but also the interaction among the events, the person's physiology, and your prior experiences, and also the kind of support that is available to you. The way all these things interact together is what is going to determine how traumatic that event is going to be to you. If somebody experiences a very difficult event, but the person has a very good social support, and then there are other layers of experiences that could cushion that effect, that person may not react the same way as somebody who does not have any of those background support. Definitely, they are going to react to it in different ways. And that is how trauma happens to all of us. And because we are different, our social experience is different, our environment is different, our genetic combination is different. So because of these variables, because of these factors, the way we're going to experience the trauma is going to be definitely different. So I'm going to be talking about 7 different types of trauma. And I want you to follow me as we do this together. The first type of trauma that I want to talk about is the acute trauma. Most of the time, acute trauma is a single overwhelming incident that threatens our life or bodily integrity. And example of this type of trauma can be found through an accident, through an assault, a physical assault, or when somebody is badly brutalized, or it could even be through a sexual assault. It could be through a natural disaster like a hurricane, like earthquake, like fire accidents, like any other natural disaster. But one thing that is very, very germane about acute trauma is that it is usually short-term in its duration. That is the difference, which means the duration with which the individual is going to experience that trauma may not necessarily be a long-term experience, but that does not diminish the severity of that traumatic experience. So that is one thing we need to know about acute trauma. It is short-term in its duration, but that does not in any way take away the severity of that experience. And it can happen through different means. Somebody who had a ghastly accident, perhaps had his 2 legs cut off, or losing some members of his body or her body, they lost a loved one, or they were badly bumped in the vehicle, or they had a spinal cord injury. All this level of events is what we classify as an acute trauma. Then another type of trauma is a chronic trauma. A chronic trauma most of the time starts slow and then continue to get worse, and of course continues in perpetuity. It is more of a long-lasting type of trauma that could even be for a lifetime. So a chronic trauma is a prolonged or repeated exposure to distressing situation. Sometimes that is why when somebody is in an abusive relationship or marriage, it is always wrong to continue to tell that person to endure, because what this does to that individual is that it can easily set up the individual for a chronic trauma. Any kind of domestic violence is not acceptable at all. And this can be through sexual abuse, maybe a parent or a family member abusing an individual within the family setting. This can cause a chronic trauma, or when a child is abused right from his childhood through neglect or improper care of the child. It could be through continuous beatings of the child. It could even be through sexual molestation, because we've had all kinds of cases of sexual molestation. It could also be through emotional abandonment. Some people don't think that this is very, very serious. When you abandon a child emotionally, I can even say it's even worse than beating the child. That can easily lead to a chronic trauma. When somebody leaves, for example, for our soldiers who goes to war, that's why we're celebrating the Veterans Day today. When they spend some time, some years, some soldiers even spend years in war, months in war, when they continue to experience this barrage of events, killings, bombing, destructions of life and property that happens in their mind, that plays back in their mind all the time, when they continue to have this, or when they see their fellow comrades, soldiers like them, dying in the war zone, this can also lead to a chronic trauma for such people. So that is how we can describe a chronic trauma. It may start very slow, but then it can continue until it completely becomes irreversible. The effects of it becomes completely irreversible in the life of the sufferer. Another type of trauma, which will be my number 3, is a complex trauma. And the way this one works, of course, complex means something that is complicated. It has multiple layers to it. It involves multiple interpersonal traumas. It could mean an amalgamation of different types of traumas colliding to produce a dangerously traumatizing event for the sufferer. Sometimes a complex trauma can also start from childhood. Like I said, in the case of chronic trauma, when a child continues to experience repeated emotional or physical abuse, not just from from the family setting alone, but this can also come from those that you believe should be a caregiver to the child. Of course, people like the teacher in school, people like the clergymen in the church, people like their uncles, their aunties, their cousins, their big cousins, even step parents or parents. We've had cases of parents dehumanizing their own children. Even here in the United States, we've had cases of such happening, and of course of step parents dealing with their step children in a way that is not acceptable in the society. So when you have this repeated emotional and physical abuse from caregivers, people that are supposed to protect, to provide a shield of protection around the child, when they are the one now abusing the child, that is a kind of complex or complicated trauma. And I cited example like parents, especially step parents or predatory teachers who are predators, clergymen who are predators, uncles who are predators, cousins who are predators, and aunties who are predators. Most of the time, these are the people that you think should provide a layer of protection for a child, but oftentimes they are the one exploiting the child, teaching the child things that should not have come to the knowledge of that child. That's another form of trauma. Another form of trauma or type of trauma is secondary or vicarious trauma. And the way this one works is that it is not that something bad happens to you, but what this means is that you witness somebody that something bad happens to, and the effect of what is happening to them is what is triggering your own trauma. It's kind of funny, but it is real. For example, when you see a journalist covering a war event, or a journalist covering an extraordinary event that is happening, this can cause a trauma for the journalist. Or when you see first responders like policemen, like firefighters, like emergency squads who comes to rescue people in an emergency. When these kind of people experiences trauma, just because they saw somebody that an event has happened to, that is what we refer to as a secondary or vicarious trauma. It could be a journalist witnessing or covering a mass shooting. If you have ever seen the footage or the graphic pictures of a mass shooting in a school or something, or in a mall, or in any of those places on television before, you know how traumatic this event can be. Talk less of somebody who is witnessing such event firsthand. This has a way of affecting some individuals. They are not the one experiencing the event, but the consequence of them witnessing those who have experienced the event can also cause some level of trauma in this kind of people. Another type of trauma is systemic trauma. Systemic trauma. If you have ever heard about racism before, if you have ever heard about discrimination before, these are what falls under that category. It is an oppression or marginalization of a particular target groups. When you target a group for oppression or for marginalization, that is what we refer to as a systemic trauma. And you are not just doing this for today, you are doing it to for generations to come. For example, the way racism works in countries like United States of America, for example, you know that it's not just about what is happening to that individual, but it's about what has been happening to generations of people before that individual and to the generations of people that will come after that individual. Sometimes people don't understand how systemic trauma works. Sometimes we're quick to say certain people are lazy, they are not ready to work, they are not ready to be to take their destiny in their hand. When people talk that way and they don't go deeper into what is making these people to have that way of relating with life, they don't understand how trauma works. And this is an example of a systemic trauma. Some people feel that it is their right to ascend to the highest position in life, where some people just feel they feel indifferent to it. Those are effects of trauma. And it is high time we call a spade and call it what it is, and then begin as a society come together and see how we can alleviate the sufferings of those who are going through this kind of trauma. When you see people who are being racially abused, people who are being discriminated against because of the way they speak, because of their nation, because of their religion, when you see people who are being discriminated against, not because of their inability, but because of the color of their skin, that is a form of systemic trauma. And we see this all the time during games, during local and international games. We've seen it in the Olympics, we've seen it in World Cups, we've seen it in national leagues, we've seen it in different types of sports. You see some fans calling certain players monkeys, all sorts of horrible names. We've seen this happening in schools, even kids calling their fellow kids some horrible names. We've seen this happening in workplace. You see people who are not able to go beyond certain position, not because they don't have the capacity to occupy that position, but just because of the way they look, the way they speak, or from where they come from. Because of that, they cannot go beyond that particular position. These are all forms of systemic trauma. It has a way of traumatizing people, and it is high time we call what it is. We call it what it is, and then find a way to work around it. Also, systemic trauma can also come in form of genocide or ethnic cleansing. We've seen that happen during the Holocaust, when Adolf Hitler wanted to ensure that he completely eliminates all human that is of Jewish origin. We saw that happening. We saw how he killed over 6 million Jews in a gas chamber. That is enormous, killing just a group of people just because they are Jews. We've seen that happening. We saw what also happened in Rwanda in the 90s, in the early 90s, when a genocide took place in that country where a particular ethnic group was they were trying to completely wipe out a particular ethnic group. We can also say what is also happening in Nigeria, which has been happening for nearly 20 years now, or even more, which is the Fulani incessant killing of people in Benue State, in Taraba State, in Plateau State. This has been happening for years, and thank God it's now a global conversation now. Hopefully, maybe our government in Nigeria will be able to do something about it. But this has been on for years. and nobody seems to be doing or to be taking the right action to address the situation. These are systemic trauma. It's a deliberate attempt to take certain people away out of the picture. It's like you are trying to suppress people to uplift other people. And of course, another form of systemic trauma is colonization, which is sometimes many Africans believe they are not in trauma, but the effect of colonization is what we're witnessing in Africa today. It's a traumatic event. And what has caused what is happening in Africa today is nothing but the effect of colonization. Because colonization is when you forcefully displace people from their place of origin. Like think about the numbers of individuals that were shipped away from the soil of Africa, taken to Cuba, taken to Brazil, taken to every other part of the world to farm on the plantation farm. You know, these are forms of trauma that people have gone through. And not to even talk about those who lost their life during the slave trade, because people that were shipped were not even as much as people that died in the process of being shipped. Millions of people lost their life in the Atlantic Ocean because some of them couldn't even make it to the world where they are being taken to. So they have to be thrown inside the water, inside the Atlantic Ocean. People are not even talking about that. So that is the effect of colonization, a deliberate attempt to erase certain people's culture to promote your own hegemony. That is another form of trauma. Another form of trauma is betrayal trauma. And this is a harm by someone that you trust to protect you. That is a kind of trauma. When you believe that somebody is supposed to be there to protect and love you, and that person betrays that trust that you have in him or her, and then uses that opportunity to work against you. That's what we call a betrayal trauma. It could be a kind of infidelity that happens in marriage or in relationships. When you have believed that your husband will be there for you, that you believe is all in all for you, and suddenly you begin to find out about his extramarital affairs with other women. Or when you believe that your wife is all that you have, only for you to realize that all the children that you have in your house are not truly your children. They are children of other people. That's a betrayal. It can cause betrayal trauma because this is somebody you have trusted, you have believed with all your life, but then has gone behind you to disappoint you. It can also come from relationships, somebody you believe you're going to spend the rest of your life with, only for them to do the unimaginable to you. That is a form of betrayal trauma. Another form of betrayal trauma can come from a clergy, a priest, or somebody who is in a religious position, who are meant to protect, to guide, to lead, to direct, and then they are using their position to exploit their followers through sexual abuse. That is another form of betrayal trauma. And I believe many of these things I'm sharing are not new. They are things many of us have heard on the news. Some of us have even witnessed it, and it is really happening. These are form betrayer, abuser, maybe somebody who is supposed to be your lecturer in the university. This happens commonly in Africa. I've never seen such happening in the USA because there is a dire consequences for that if that ever happens. So many of the professors here in the US don't even attempt to do it. But in Africa, where there is less monitoring of this kind of events, where the rules are not fully upheld, and you see people getting away with this. A lecturer who is supposed to be a mentor to a female student, now because of that superior ability that you have over that young girl, you begin to use your position to abuse that young girl. That's a form of betrayal, trauma. It can cause a kind of trauma that young lady may not be able to get away from in the nearest future. It could another form of betrayal trauma could even be from a corporate whistleblower retaliation. Maybe somebody saw something bad happening in a company and then decided to blow the whistle. And then after the dust are settled and they now begin to retaliate to that person for blowing the whistle of the event that happened in the company. Because the reason in the first place where that person decided to share what was happening was because he or she felt he or she will be protected. But rather than being protected, what the person begins to experience is a retaliation for that which he has done to protect the image of that country or to protect the existence of that company. Another form of trauma, another form of betrayal, trauma is medical gaslighting. And what is medical gaslighting? This is when a medical personnel deliberately or professional deliberately dismisses, minimizes, and invalidates a patient's legitimate medical concern or symptoms. You're trying to play it down. You're trying not to make it a serious. You don't want people in the society to see it as something that is serious, whereas it is something that is serious, but you are deliberately playing it down through deliberate misdiagnosis or trying to delay a worsening health condition until it becomes completely irreversible. That's another form of betrayal trauma, because ordinarily a health worker is supposed to provide care, is supposed to provide support for those who are going through difficult health challenge. Another form of trauma is existential or spiritual trauma. This, for somebody like me, this is one of the trauma that I have experienced, because I have actually come to a point in my life where I had to question my faith. I had to question who God is. I had to question whether heaven is real or not. I have to question everything about my religious experience. It was a difficult moment, and I was really ready that if I don't find substance in my questioning, probably that will be the end. But thankfully, I was able to find something that is more enduring than the suffering that I was going through at that particular point in time, and which has made me to become a new kind of pastor, a new kind of Christian altogether. It was because of that traumatic experience that has changed who I have eventually become while still practicing my faith. So it's also a real trauma. And some people have had that kind of trauma, and it has, rather than helping them to forge ahead in their faith, sometimes people can call it quits to their faith. I've seen pastors who have denied the faith and decided to go the other way of their faith. So these things happen and they are real. And the earlier we pay our attention to them, the better it is for us. So there is a reality of existential and spiritual trauma. It could be through an event that shatters the meaning of your faith. It shatters your belief in God. It shatters what you believe is your life purpose. These things are real and it can happen to anyone, regardless of who you think you are. Of course, a near-death experience can also provide an existential or spiritual trauma for somebody. When you have a moral injury, for example, when you are being forced to harm other people during war, or you are being forced to engage in sexual molestation during war, these are something that goes against your moral upbringing. It can cause an existential or spiritual trauma for some people. Of course, religious abuse by a religious leader can cause trauma for people. It's unfortunate the way some spiritual leaders are practicing their faith today is rather than helping people, it's really causing difficulty for other people to even come to the faith, because the way these so-called religious leaders are presenting themselves is not helping anybody. So it can cause spiritual and existential trauma for some people. And when somebody go through profound grief, and if you have lost a family member to death, to the cold hand of death, if you've lost somebody to an incurable disease, something bad, if you have ever experienced something of that magnitude, that we can categorize as a profound grief, then this can cause an existential or spiritual trauma for people. Sometimes if we don't experience this thing, we don't know how powerful they can be until we go through them. But I'm telling you, they are very real. So we're having mentioned all the 7 types of trauma. And sometimes it is the causes that lead to those types of trauma. After mentioning about 7 of them, I'm going to talk to you about the 4 areas that trauma affects, the 4 key areas that trauma affects in our life. Number 1, you need to understand that trauma basically affects us emotionally. The feeling of intense fear, the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of shame, the feeling of anger, the feeling of numbness. These are the ways in which trauma affects us emotionally. Not only does trauma affect us emotionally, trauma also affects us mentally. It affects our cognitive level. Sometimes when you begin to have intrusive memories, or when you begin to have flashbacks of what has happened previously, when you suddenly become hypervigilant of what is happening around you, you become suspicious of what is happening, of people's behavior around you, or you become disassociated with what is happening around you, feeling of detachment from reality. These are ways that trauma can affect us mentally in our cognitive level. Another way that trauma can affect us is that trauma can affect our physical fitness, how we present ourselves physically. It can affect us in that dimension. it can cause hyperarousal within us. We are consistently restless. For example, we can begin to feel our heart racing very fast. We can begin to feel sleeplessness, insomnia. Or for some people, it can be too much sleep. They just keep sleeping for hours and hours and hours. These are ways that trauma affects people. It can also cause us chronic pain, or can even cause immune system dysregulation. It can cause our immune system to break down. Trauma is very powerful, and the earlier we learn about it and how to address it, the better it is for every one of us. And not only does trauma affect our physical, our fitness, it can also affect our behavioral pattern, how we behave, how we socialize. It can even cause us to begin to avoid the things that reminds us of that trauma. That is avoidance of reminders. It can cause us to begin to run away from certain things that we believe can trigger the remembrance of what has happened to us in the time past. It can also cause some people to begin to abuse substances, or they can even begin to do self-harm to themselves, injuring themselves. This is how trauma affects us behaviorally. So, emotional area, it affects us emotionally, it affects us in our cognitive level, it affects our physical fitness, and it also affects our behavioral pattern. Now we're going to talk about the effects of trauma, or what I call the damning, the damning consequences of trauma, because by the time trauma gets to this level, it doesn't care who you are anymore. It gives you the consequences as it is, and there is absolutely nothing anybody can do about it. So when trauma is left untreated without any conscientious intervention, then trauma can lead to these 4 things that I'm going to mention. Number 1, trauma, when left untreated, can lead to what I call post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, it wasn't me that first identified it. It's what scholars have identified, psychologists have identified a long time ago. But when a trauma is left untreated, unattended to, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and I believe many people have heard that word before, but many people may not really know how it works. But when you don't address a traumatic situation in the way that you should address it, then it can lead to PTSD. Another effect or damning consequence of trauma is that it can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. It can lead to people abusing their system with substances. It can lead to substance use disorders. They're using the substance for a coping mechanism. But over time, the substance they are using will stop helping them to cope. Rather than helping them to cope, it will now begin to shut down their system in an irreparable manner. So when trauma is left untreated, can lead to depression, anxiety, and substance use disorder. Another thing that can happen when trauma is left untreated is that it can lead to relationship difficulties. That is, it affects the way you manage a good and healthy relationships. It becomes extremely difficult for you to manage a good and healthy relationship. And we've witnessed people like that. who are very difficult to please in a relationship or in a marriage or in a friendship or even in social activities. You just see that it is extremely difficult to have a connection with such people. So relationship difficulties is another thing that can arise when trauma is not treated or is not addressed in the way that it should be. It can cause individuals to begin to experience a reenactment pattern. And what does that mean? A reenactment pattern simply means a playback of past traumatic experiences. You begin to have it being played back in your head. And that alone can make it significantly impossible for you to connect with people. Another thing that can happen if trauma is not addressed properly is that it can lead to physical health issues like heart diseases. It can lead to autoimmune conditions. And autoimmune condition simply means a combination of genes and the environmental triggers. Sometimes like I said at the beginning, many of these traumatic factors, many of these traumatic conditions are already within our body system, lying untouched. They are just there. They are not there to harm you at that moment. They are just there. They are just waiting their own gently. But then when something comes within the environment that triggers it, then you begin to see the eruption of that trauma coming out in full force. So that is what happens when trauma is left unaddressed. It can lead to autoimmune condition, which is a combination of our gene and environmental triggers, which can be as a result of chronic stress and immense stress that somebody is under. It can easily trigger it off. So now that we've mentioned a lot of things about trauma, I think it is also important for us to talk about how we can address it. We know the consequence it will leave if it is not addressed. And then I think we also need to talk about how we can deal with it, how we can heal from trauma. I'd like you to know that recovery is possible through evidence-based methods. There are various ways and means through which we can heal or deal from trauma or deal with trauma. We can heal from it and we can deal with it in some pragmatic ways. One of the ways through which we can deal with trauma is through evidence-based methods like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That is EMDR. Is a form of therapy. And people who go through this therapy we can help people who go through this therapy to heal from their trauma. Another type of trauma, the type of therapy that can be used to assist those who are going through trauma is through the cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. It's another form of therapy that can be used to heal people from their trauma. Other forms are through somatic experiences or through trauma-focused psychotherapy. These are ways that people can heal through trauma. Of course, you will need a highly qualified individual to assist you in this dimension. You cannot just go to anybody to assist you with this. You have to really go to competent and qualified psychologists to help you with all these methods that I've just mentioned above. Other ways through which you can deal or heal from trauma is through body-based practices, like those who are practicing yoga or those who are doing breath work, those who are using their breathing method or the way they breathe. They use the way they breathe to actually actually help people to heal from trauma, or through mindfulness or through meditation. They use it to regulate the nervous system of that individual, because basically that is where trauma affects majorly. It shuts down your nervous system. Other ways through which you can deal and heal from trauma is through social support. That is, you need to be in a safe relationship and in a safe community. You have to be among people that loves you, people that cares for you, people that are how to look after you. You have to be in the midst of such people. So social support is another way you can deal and heal from trauma. And of course, you can also heal from trauma by practicing self-care, by practicing self-care. Yeah, I didn't come to appreciate self-care until much more later in my lifetime. That is when I realized that self-care is very, very important and crucial to how healthy we become in life. So you want to be you want to be very, very intentional about the numbers of hours you sleep in a day. Some people will tell you that you should not sleep more than 3 hours or 4 hours. I'm telling you, those advice are not good for you. The most important thing for every individual is to have between 6 to 8 hours sleeps every day. Forget about what you have not achieved. You need that good time to sleep to even get better at anything that you do. Don't listen to people who are telling you, just sleep for 3 hours, just sleep for 4 hours. When you do that and you do it consistently, you are damaging your body. You are damaging your system. The effect may not be immediate, but it will compound over time and shut down and eventually shut down your system. So you need to give yourself good sleep. You need to provide yourself with good nutrition that will nourish your body. And of course, you need to learn how to gradually re-engage with life. Sometimes when traumatic experiences or events happen to us, it causes us to disengage with life. But then the way to heal yourself is to now begin to learn how to gradually re-engage yourself with life in a meaningful way. Now, there is no way, as I begin to wrap up now, there is no way we will talk about how to deal and heal from trauma without necessarily talking about what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. For example, when trauma happens to people, some people can experience very dire consequences from it, whereas some people can use what has happened to them as a way of moving their life forward. And that is why post-traumatic growth is a very crucial concept that you need to know when it comes to dealing and healing from trauma. This is purely how you turn your adversities into your assets. That is what post-traumatic growth is talking about. It is turning your problem into something that becomes useful for you. Most traumatic growth occurs when profound loss meets deliberate reconstruction, especially after events like bereavement, life-threatening illness, or betrayal, and the person chooses to author a new chapter while also not denying the pain. When you are going through post-traumatic growth, it is not to say that you are going to deny the pain that you have gone through. It is not denying the pain. It is still acknowledging the pain and then using the pain as a launching pad for your greatness. That is what post-traumatic growth means. It is turning your failure into asset. It is turning your problem into something that becomes useful for you as you begin to rebuild and reconstruct your life. Now, when you go through post-traumatic growth, for somebody like me, I can definitely tell you that I am in the post-traumatic growth stage of my life. I've experienced traumatic experience in the time past, and by the help of God, I've been able to use those bad experiences to build a better life for myself. And this is what happens to you when you go through post-traumatic growth. There is a way it manifests itself that when you see, then you certainly know that you are experiencing a post-traumatic growth. The first thing that happens when you go through post-traumatic growth is that you suddenly become, you have a greater appreciation for life. You're not taking life as something that is normal. You have a great sense of appreciation for what life is giving you, for what is happening to you through life. You have a very deep sense of appreciation for what life is all about. You begin to savor every small moment of your life. You begin to show gratitude for being alive. And then you begin to worry yourself less about the petty things of life. You have a deep sense of appreciation of what life is all about. If that is happening to you, then I can tell you that you are already experiencing the fruits or the manifestation of post-traumatic growth in your life. Another thing that happens when you are going through post-traumatic growth is that you suddenly experience improved relationships. For example, you have a deeper empathy for people. You become more vulnerable. You become more vulnerable in life, not in a bad sense, but in a way that helps people to live and lead their life in the right way. And then you suddenly discover that you have a stronger bond with your loved ones. It could be with your family, with your friends. You have a stronger bond with them. If you are experiencing that, it is a form or a manifestation of post-traumatic growth. Another thing that happens when you experience post-traumatic growth is that you begin to see new possibilities. You suddenly believe, or you suddenly become aware that there is nothing that is impossible for you. You begin to experience massive career change in a positive direction. You begin to pursue creative endeavors. You begin to pursue, or you begin to lead your life in a path that you have never previously imagined in your life before. When these things are happening to you, it's a form of post-traumatic growth. These are things that is happening to me, and I'm sharing it with you. Another thing that happens, or another manifestation of post-traumatic growth, is that you begin to experience personal strength. You experience increased form of resilience. You begin to tell yourself, if I can survive this, if I can survive that, then there is nothing in this world that I cannot handle anymore. You become confident, not overconfident, but you suddenly become confident, confident in yourself. And of course, the last manifestation of post-traumatic growth is that you suddenly experience spiritual and existential change. Now, I have a word for this. This is what I call an enlightenment. You become enlightened. if you have truly gone through a traumatic experience and you come out of it, what has happened to you is nothing but an enlightenment experience. You become enlightened. You begin to see the world in a new light. You begin to see how the world functions in a different way, completely different from the way you have been seeing the world before. These are some of the manifestations of post-traumatic growth. You have a deeper meaning of your faith, deeper of understanding of life. You now begin to see your faith in a revised version. You are not locked up in your old beliefs anymore. You are still believing God, but you are believing God in a more transformed way and manner. You begin to have a new sense of purpose, a new sense of connection, a new sense of connecting yourself to something that is bigger and larger than you. That is what happens to you when you experience a manifestation of a post-traumatic growth in your life. Now, as I finally wrap up, let me say that post-traumatic growth is the positive psychological transformation that emerges after struggling with highly challenging or traumatic life events. When you experience that positive transformation, psychological transformation, after going through difficulties in your life, when you experience that positive psychology transformation, that is what we call a post-traumatic growth. And this is where I believe and I hope every of my listener will find themselves after going through your traumatic, difficult situation. I'm not in any way undermining or under-emphasizing what you're going through, but all I'm sharing with you through this podcast is that there is a way out. There is a way out to a better life. There is a way out to a better experience, to a deeper relationship with your maker. There is a better way that you can reinterpret what you are going through that will totally transform the way you see life altogether. I'd like you to note that trauma is not in itself good. It's not that being traumatic is good in itself. But what is good about trauma is the deep restructuring of beliefs, identity, and priorities that you experience as you rebuild your life. Listen to me, there is nothing good about trauma, but the way you are relating with that trauma, the way you process it, the way you utilize it to benefit you is what we call post-traumatic growth. I hope that as you go through that difficult moment, I hope you can someday share with me that having listened to this podcast, that I really helped you to come out of your struggle. Some of us have gone through struggles in life. There were people who helped me along the way. I wouldn't say I was there for myself all the way. There were people who were there for me all the way. The people that I can't even remember to share their name now. There are great people who have helped me to move away from my trauma and become something that is useful to myself and to the society. That also can be your experience if you take heed to everything that I have shared in this podcast. I hope to hear from you in the nearest future about how this podcast accepts you. God bless you. See you some other time. Amen.